We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Chesam and Beis in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 108b. The Mishnah here continues, Zeh HaKlal, here is the general rule, get achar miyun. If you have a situation where, let's say, the first husband gave her a get after the refusal, meaning the get came last, so then asura, so in that situation it's going to be forbidden, lachzor lo, it's going to be forbidden for her to return to him. Again, then she's treated like a regular divorced woman. However, miyun achar get, but if you have a situation where the miyun comes after the get with that first husband, so then muteres lachzor lo, so then it's going to be permitted for her to return to him. And Rashi over here says, Zeh HaKlal, kilomar, what this means to say is, afilu pamim harve, this could happen many times. Girsha vechziru miyun, let's say he divorces her, he returns her, then she does miyun. Im nisis la'achar mitoch get, if she marries a second person after the get happened, asura lachzor lo, the rule is she's forbidden to go back to him, mitoch hamiyun, but if again she marries someone else after the miyun, so then muteres lachzor lo, so then she is permitted to go back to him. And the Mishnah continues along the same lines. Let's say the girl refuses the man, v'nisis la'acher v'girsha, and then she goes ahead and marries a second man and he divorces her, la'acher, and then there's a third man, u'miyanabu, and she refuses him, la'acher, and then there's another man, v'girsha, and he divorces her. So the rule is going to be the same. Zeh HaKlal, the rule is as follows. Kol sheyotza menu beget, any man who she left with a get, asura lachzor lo, so she's forbidden to return to him, but if she left that man with miyun, with refusal, so then muteres lachzor lo, so then she'll be mutter to return to him. And the Gemara says, Alma, we see from the first rule in the Mishnah, asi miyun u'mevatel get, that the miyun can come along and be mevatel the get. In other words, let's say you have a situation where the get was first and then there was a miyun, so the halach is, if after the miyun she goes and marries someone else, she's still allowed to return to her first husband, because we follow the miyun and we don't follow the get. The miyun comes along and is mevatel the get. Or a but we have a contradiction, because the final rule in the Mishnah said, hamima'enes be'ish v'nisis la'acher v'girsha. Let's say you have a case where she does miyun, then she marries someone else and she gets divorced, and la'acher u'miyanabo, then somebody else and she has miyun from him, la'acher v'girsha, and then somebody else and he divorces her. So Zeh HaKlal, the rule is, kol sheyotzta menu beget, any man who she left with via a get, so asura lachzor lo, she's not allowed to return to him. And b'miyun, but any man who she left with miyun, muteres lachzor lo, so she can return to that man. Now in that case you have situations where there was a miyun following a get, alma lo asi miyun dechavre, ubatel gita didei, you see that the miyun of one man is not able to be mevatel the get of the previous man. And so the Gemara says at first, Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Tavra, indeed this really is a contradiction, and therefore you have to say that this Mishnah is broken, this Mishnah is disjointed. Misha shanazu, lo shanazu, whoever taught the first rule in the Mishnah did not teach the last rule in the Mishnah. In other words, according to Shmuel, this really is a contradiction, because the first part of the Mishnah says that the miyun can be mevatel the get, and the second part of the Mishnah says that the miyun of one man cannot be mevatel the get of the other. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Umay Kushya, what's the big difficulty? V'dilma miyun didei mevatel get didei. Maybe his miyun can be mevatel his get. But miyun dechavre, but the miyun of his friend, lo mevatel gita didei, is not able to be mevatel his get. In other words, a miyun, somebody's own miyun situation, can be mevatel their own get. But if you have a miyun with one person, that doesn't mean it's going to be mevatel the get of the other person. But the Gemara says, 1 second, what's the difference that the miyun of his friend, to lo mevatel gita didei, why is that not mevatel his get? Because simply, aidi de mecharis b'remizosav u'kritzosav, since she is familiar, that's makeres, since the makeres b'remizosav u'kritzosav, since she recognizes the subtleties of her first husband's personalities, his hints and his gestures, so therefore, azal meshabish u'maisilo, he's able to convince her to remarry. In other words, we say over there, the fact that there's a miyun from, let's say, a second man, that doesn't make a difference in terms of the divorce of the first one, because we say we're certain that the first husband has a way with the girl. He'll be able to convince her to remarry. So miyun didei nami, but the Gemara says, 1 second, let's say even in a situation where there's a miyun after he gives a get, so nami lo levatel gita didei, that shouldn't nullify his get. Again, it's the same reasoning. Di'aidi de makeres b'remizosav v'kritzosav, since she recognizes his hints and his gestures, also mashabish u'maisila, he's going to be able to convince her to remarry, and therefore we should have the same concern. And so to that, the Gemara says, no, hakvar shibsha velo ishbisha. That's not really true. Because in a case, let's say, where he gave a get, and then there was a me and she refused him, you see that he already tried to convince her. He won her back after the divorce, and then nevertheless she refused. It nevertheless worked, and therefore we assume she's not really under his control anymore. That's the reason why the miyun undoes the get in that case, and therefore we follow the miyun. That's true only in a situation where the miyun was with him after his own get. But if you have a situation where a man gives a get and then there's a miyun with some other man, that doesn't mean at all that that marriage is completely undone. It is still considered a situation of divorce, and that's why she's not allowed to go back to her first husband after she was with the second husband. But the Gemara continues, Eli kasha dechavre dechavre kasha. But if there really is a contradiction, there actually is a contradiction in cases where there was a miyun after the get. We have contradiction in cases where it always happened with somebody else as follows. It said again, miyun abo vehechziro. Let's say you had a case, the Mishnah said, let's say you had a case where there was miyun, and then she remarried him, nasan laget, and then he gave her a get, v'nizes la'acher, and then she married someone else, v'nisarmalon es garsha, and she became widowed, or she was divorced from that second husband. So the halacha was, since by the first husband the get was last, so asura lachzor lo, we follow what was last, and she can't go back to the first husband. But the Gemara now makes a diuk. Apparently the only reason she's not allowed to go back to the first husband is because she was widowed or divorced from the second husband. Hamiyana, but let's say she refused the second husband, so then apparently mutaris lachzor, apparently she is allowed to go back to the first husband. And so here we see exactly that. Alma, we see asi miyun dechavre umevatel gita didei. We say that the miyun of his friend can be mevatel, his get. The fact that she was with a second man and she refused the second man, apparently that undoes the get of the first one. So now that really is a contradiction to the end of our Mishnah. Uramini, we have the following contradiction. It says in our Mishnah at the end, if a girl refuses the man, v'nises la'acher, she marries someone else, v'girsh, and he divorces her. La'acher, then she marries someone else, u'mianabu, and she refuses him. The rule was, za'aklal, the rule is as follows, kol sheyotzta mimenu beget, any man who she left with a get, asura la'achzor lo, she can't return to him. But if she left with miyun, so mutaris la'achzor lo, so she's allowed to return to him. So Alma, so we see from the end of the Mishnah, lo asi miyun dechavre mevatel gita didei, we see that the miyun of the friend is not able to nullify the get of the previous husband. And so therefore that actually is a contradiction in terms of the Mishnah. Can the miyun of somebody else nullify the get of someone previous? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rebbe Lazar says, Tavra, again, the Mishnah is broken, it's disjointed. Misha shanazu lo shanazu, whoever taught the first part did not teach the second part. It actually is a contradiction within the Mishnah. Ulo Amar Ula says a different answer. Kegon sheshlosha begitin. The case over here is sheshilsha begitin. The case over here is if she receives 3 gittin. If you have a situation where she keeps getting married to one man after the other, and there are 3 different gets that this woman received, so then already demichsia gedola. Such a woman, she already appears to be a gedola. She already appears to be an adult, and in this case, you're not going to say that a subsequent miyun would nullify the get. But in other situations, a subsequent miyun, even from another man, would indeed nullify a previous get. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here. We said since she recognizes the hints and the gestures of the first husband, so therefore we're going to say that the subsequent miyun is not going to undo the get. Again, the kama of the first husband, he'll be able to convince her to remarry, meaning meaning it's going to get to the point where he's actually going to convince her to refuse the next husband, just in order to return to her. So that's why we say when it's a different man, the fact that she has a miyun with a second man, that is not necessarily going to undo the previous get, because on the contrary, she's refusing that second man because of her relationship with the first husband. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, maybe that should be true by the first husband as well. So the Gemara says, no, that doesn't make sense. Hashibsha v'lo ishtavsha. In that case, we already have a situation where he tried to get her back, and apparently it didn't work. She's refusing this very same man, sharei la'achar gerish and echzira, because he divorced her, then he remarried her. V'lo yachal apparently he wasn't able to convince her to stay with him, and she refused him. So over here you really have a situation where the refusal does undo the get. There's no concern here that he's going to be able to convince her. And that's true by any situation where she leaves with a refusal. Apparently he tried to have her stay by her and it didn't work, she refused. But however, let's say she marries a second man, man. Mitocha get, and that's, she divorces the first man and goes and marries a second man. Holech Mephaisas over there already, he's trying to convince her to leave the second man and come back, and he's trying to appease her. V'yomar mischaretani begerish, and he's telling her, I really regret the fact that I divorced you. V'yohavta, and she loves him. Shari al karcha yotzta mimenu, because again, she just left with a get. She didn't want to leave him. She never refused him. She was divorced with a get. So hilga chadro mamanis b'sheni. Therefore, that's really what's convincing her to refuse the second man. So in that case, we say that the refusal to the second man is not necessarily going to nullify the get of the first one, because on the contrary, she's refusing the second man simply because of her relationship with the first husband. That's why there could be a distinction. There's a possible distinction between a refusal with the very same man and a refusal that happens with a subsequent husband. But then the Gemara says that there really is a contradiction even with a subsequent husband, because it seems to be saying in the Mishnah, Hamiyanu muteres lachzor, it sounds like if she refused the second husband, she could go back l'rishon to the first husband. Al ma'asi miyan dechavri, you do see that the miyan of the subsequent husband can come along, umegal al katanas, and it shows that really, again, she's just a minor, these marriages are nothing. Umevatal gita mikama, apparently it does nullify the first get, and that contradicts what's the rule at the end of the Mishnah. And so finally the Gemara answers, shashil shabegitin. No, if you have 3 gittin, shotziu a shalosh pamim beget, you have a case where a woman is divorced 3 times with a get, the mirchsia kegedola, there already she appears to be like an adult, sulo hadra lechad minayu, so at that point she can't go back to any of them, to lo asi miyun da'acher levatule, meaning the miyun of somebody else can't come and nullify. Aval kodem shetashalish, but before it happens 3 times, asi miyun da'chavri mavatal gita, the Gemara does say at the end that yes, the miyun of one subsequent husband can undo the get of the other, and therefore if he wants to return and marry her, he's allowed to remarry her, because again, we only consider it like a miyun, not like a get. And the Gemara continues, Man Tana, so who is this Tana of the Mishnah? Now Rashi over here says, Man Tana da'amr le'el misha shanazu lo shanazu. We said before that the Tana who learns the first part of the Mishnah might not be the same Tana who learns the second part of the Mishnah. So who is this Tana of the Mishnah that is going to say that in such a situation it is forbidden, that we will not say the miyun of the subsequent husband undoes the get of the first husband? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, that Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Mai dichsiv, what does the pasuk mean? Meimenu bekesef shasinu etzeinu b'mechir yavo, that we had to pay a price for our water, meaning to say we had to pay a price for our Torah. The Gemara is understanding. B'shas hasakon, and this baksha halachazu, this very halachic question was asked at the time of great danger. There was religious persecution. Haresha yotza merishon beget. It's our case. Let's say she leaves the first husband with a get, umisheni b'miyun, and then she leaves the second husband with a miyun. So does that miyun nullify the get, and she's allowed to go back to her first husband or not? Ma, what's the halacha shetachzor l'rishon? Is she allowed to return to her first husband? So Sachru Adam Echad ba'arba meo zuz, they hired a particular individual for 400 zuz in order to ask this question. It was dangerous to ask such a halacha question at this time. V'shalu es Rabbi Akiva b'beisu asur, and they asked Rabbi Akiva this question, and he was in prison. V'yasar, and he said, indeed, it is forbidden, meaning to say that that subsequent miyun does not undo the get. As Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira ben Etzivin, they also asked the same question to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira in Etzivin, V'yasar, and he said it was forbidden. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi said, Lazulo hitzrachnu. We don't even need to ask such a shaila. In other words, on the contrary, no, for sure it is permitted in such a situation for her to return to her first husband. Why? Because Leser Kares Hitarta, you're allowing a woman who does miyun, you're treating her as if she was never a married woman. You're even allowing Iser Kares. In other words, you're saying the miyun undoes the marriage completely. You're allowing her to marry other people. She's not considered a married person. Leser Lavlo. So don't you think that a miyun we're not going to be worried about an isser lav? Don't you think that it's obvious that if she has a miyun from the second man, certainly she's allowed to go back to her first husband? Machzer grushaso, marrying a woman that you divorce. Let's say you divorce a woman, she marries someone else in the interim, and then you want to remarry her, that's only an isser lav. So certainly the miyun is going to take care of an isser lav, and therefore we see the other Tana in this debate. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi is saying it is certainly permitted for her to return to her first husband in this case, and rather Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi says there was a different question that they had to ask, and they had to risk lives in order to ask the shaila. Beram kach shalu, however, here was the question that they really asked. Let's say there's a situation where this girl happens to be the wife of the brother of his mother, and meaning that is one of the prohibited secondary relationships. In other words, this particular girl who is a minor is prohibited to this man as a secondary, as a derabbanan erva. Now it goes ahead, this girl, and she marries marries his brother, his paternal brother. V'meis, and now his paternal brother dies. So now you have a situation where this woman is falling to him to Yibam. So what's the halacha shetemoyin hashta? What's the halacha that what she should do is she should do miyun from her first original marriage, undo that original marriage completely, so there's no secondary relationship. V'tiakrinu l'nesuin kamoy, undo that first marriage completely. V'tisiyavim, and so then in that case you'll be able to allow Yibam. There's not going to be any situation of erva over here. And the Gemara explains, Yesh miyun lachar misa, is there miyun after death, and we therefore say can undo everything? B'makom mitzvah, in a situation where you want to fulfill this mitzvah of Yibam, or olo, or no, do we say there's no miyun in such a situation? And so as in this particular case, Sachru shnei b'nei adam ba'arba meo zuz, they hire two people for 400 zuz, ubo v'shalu es Rabbi Akiva b'beiso asurin, and they went and they asked Rabbi Akiva the shaila in the prison, v'yasser, and he said it was forbidden. As Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir ben Etziven, they asked this question to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir and Etziven, v'yasser, and he said it is forbidden. And Rashi over here explains, Eishes Acheoim, again, originally she was the wife of the brother of his mother, Shnia midivrei Sofrim, that's just a secondary erva d'Rabbanan, Gezeira mishum Eishes Acheoav, that's a Gezeira because of a case of the wife of the brother of the father, she erva, that's a real case of erva. So again, Ma'usha to mind, what's the halacha? Can she do miyun on that first marriage after that marriage is already over and that husband already died, B'nisuin harishonim, that first marriage, she'll refuse it now, Shalote Shniel over to Siyavim, that way she's no longer a secondary erva, and then Yibam should be allowed. Aval be'ishes the erva, now Rashi points out, if this would be a real erva, it would not be a shnia case. Kagon eishes achiv me'imo ketana, let's say at a case where we're talking about the wife of his brother, his maternal brother, v'meis, and then he dies, v'nasa achiv me'aviv, and then she goes and marries his paternal brother, pshita landalo asimiyan del achar misa lemishri erva liyibum. Everybody agrees there. It's obvious that she can't do a miyun after death in order to allow a case of erva for Yibum. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Ashion, Rav Yitzchak bar Ashion says, Umode Rav, now Rav would admit, Rashi over here explains, Umode Rav admits, even though Rav says that the miyun of the subsequent husband is not going to undo his get, so granted it's not going to undo his get in the sense that she's not allowed to go back and marry her first husband. But in terms of his brother, Nisbatal, it actually is mevatal everything, to have a grusha sachiv. She's no longer going to be considered the grusha of his brother, and she can actually marry his brother. Now, our Mishnah said that if he gives her a get, she's forbidden to his relatives. And that's only in a case where she didn't subsequently leave somebody else through miyun, where we didn't nullify that first get. But in a certain sense, that first get is nullified in terms of, let's say, the individual's brother. That's what Rav Yitzchak bar Ashian here says. Rav would admit that she is permitted to the brother of this person, even though she's usher to him, because she's his grusha, it can't be machzer grushaso, but she can marry his brother. And the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. Who knew the makeres b'misosav ukritsosav? He's the one that she recognizes his hints and his gestures. Avalochiv lo, but his brother not. In other words, of course, when it comes to his brother, the get is going to be nullified. We only don't say there's nullification. We say there's no nullification in a situation by him himself, because we say the fact that she refused some subsequent husband has nothing to do with him. On the contrary, maybe she refused the second husband because the first husband is convincing her to refuse the second husband and come back to him. Now that's all true by him, but that's not going to be true by the brother. So of course, by the brother we're going to say that. Rashi over here says, Pshita, we've already said that a refusal can come and nullify the get. The only reason we asked her if it was some different man was because we said that she recognizes his gestures, and so therefore again he's going to convince her. But by the brother you're never going to say that, so of course she should be permitted to his brother. And so the Gemara says simply, Mao detema, no, what might you have thought? Ligzor hayatu hay, we should make a gezerah by the brother because of the other one brother because of the other brother. Kamash malan, so comes to teach us that we don't make such a gezerah. Rashi over here says, Mao detema nigzor achiv atuhu, di shari leila achiv, if we're going to allow her to marry the brother, amri hachazina debatal gita, people will get confused, people will think the get was nullified, v'yasi iyu leminsav, and so then it's going to come out that she'll marry him as well. And the Gemara continues, Vika Diamri, some of the following version, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Ashiyan, Rav Yitzchak bar Ashiyan says, Keshem sha'asura lo, just like she's asur to him, Kach asura la'achiv, so too she's asur to his brother. So the Gemara says, Va'ina makeres, Bekritzoseim, Urimuzoseim, why should she be asur to the brother? So she doesn't recognize his hints and his gestures of the brother, so why do we say that the brother's a problem? And the Gemara says, Gzeira achivatuhu, according to this version, so we do make a Gzeira by the brother because of him. Since she is asur to her first husband, she's asur to her first brother's husband, to her first husband's brother as well. And the Mishnah says, Hamegarish es ha'isha, let's say a person divorces a woman, ve'achazira, and then he remarries her, muteres liyavam, so she's going to be mutter to the brother-in-law. Rashi over here says, muteres liyavam, v'lo amrina nisuin harishonim mapilim yevama lifnei yavam. In other words, we don't say that the first marriage, that's what causes the yibum to happen, that when the husband dies, she now falls to the brother-in-law. V'harei nesru olav osan nisuin b'shas shegir sha'achim. Now that first marriage, there was then a divorce from that first marriage, and she actually became asur to the brother as the Eisha Sa'ach, as the wife of his brother. V'havale grush azachiv, she became now the divorcee of his brother. So maybe you'll say that that first divorce undoes the entire possibility of Yibam. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Tes Amud Aleph.